Hey guys, I had a happy birthday yesterday. Did you know it's my brother's birthday too? And we're not twins. Yeah. My brother's name is Travis, and he's 2 years younger than me, but we have the same birthday, which is really weird. What's even weirder is that 3 days before our birthday is my mom's birthday. Our mom's birthday, because he has the same mom, which makes me think about Abraham saying that he and Sarah had different moms but the same dad. And we just don't even know if he's telling the truth because he's not really good about telling the truth to outsiders, is he? No. Anyway, but I had a good birthday. I ate things that I should not have eaten. A lot of cake. No ice cream. No ice cream. Because I've had a sore throat and I don't want to. That makes it worse. Because I hope you guys enjoy your birthdays. So I'm 55 years old now. And so, AARP, as your parents will tell you, knows my address now, and they're just spamming me with mail. Okay. Anyway, feeling kind of weird today, and I don't really want to do my normal intro. Sometimes you just don't feel like doing things the way you normally do. All right, let's start the broadcast. Because I'm tired. I didn't get any sleep last night because Mark's dog didn't want to sleep with Mark. And so I ended up sleeping with her in the other room. And she wanted to be very close, and she is very hot. And she was wanting to clean herself instead of sleep. And then my cats wanted to be in there too. And so I had everybody in the guest bed. And I'm very tired now. Plus, I had a soda yesterday late in the day. Have you guys ever had soda late in the day and then you can't sleep? I almost never drink soda because, I don't have a lot of caffeine. And when I have caffeine, boy, howdy, do I feel it. It's like, So today I am paying the price for what I did yesterday. But, you only have one birthday a year, thank goodness, because I'm old enough. It'd be terrible if I had more than one birthday a year. I mean, cake's great, but I'd rather have it be cake from someone else's birthday. Okay. Anyway, let's just do this. I am Miss Tyler, and welcome to Context for Kids. And if you want to hear all the stuff I usually say, watch one of the other episodes or listen to the other episodes because I am so tired today from celebrating my birthday yesterday and eating many bad things that I shouldn't have eaten, but they were yummy. So there. And I drank a soda, so I was up all night until 2:30. And then I slept for 3 hours. Okay. Don't feel sorry for me. I was naughty, and I knew what I was doing. Anyway, today we'll be finishing up Genesis 20. Very short chapter of the Bible with only 18 verses in it. Of course, Jesus' Bible never had any chapters or verses. Those didn't start being added until about 600 years ago. And they're a really good idea because without them, it's hard to find stuff, and especially in the really long books like Isaiah and Jeremiah, because people just made decisions about where the chapters and verses should begin and end, and they didn't always make the best choices, but usually they did a good job. Okay, so I got to tell you kind of a funny story about a hoax from the 1800s. Now, a hoax is when someone tries to trick people with something that isn't true. And some hoaxes are really hard to prove wrong, but this one was obvious right away to Bible scholars because the person who wrote this hoax didn't know very much about the life of Jesus. He wrote something that we call the Archko volume, which claimed to have been made up of a bunch of documents that the guy supposedly found in the Vatican Library in Rome. Now, not only isn't this a public library, but almost no one can get into it, not for very long when they do. He told everyone that he had gone there and made up a big long story about it that ended up not being true. But the easiest way to tell that this was all a big lie is that he had stories about people who lived at the time of Jesus quoting from the Bible. And that's not a problem. But he had them using chapters and verses when they wouldn't exist for another 1400 years. It's easy to find out that kind of information now on the internet, but he had no way of knowing. As far as he knew, they'd always had chapters and verses. That's why when we see Jesus and his disciples quoting from the Hebrew Bible, they don't give chapters and verses because there weren't any. Anyway, that has nothing to do with this week's lesson, but I just think it's cool. There are always people out there trying to make money by tricking other people or getting them to believe certain things that aren't true, and especially when it comes to the Bible, and that's really sad. And of course, this whole chapter is about Abraham tricking King Abimelech of the Philistines. So, Abimelech was angry about Abraham and Sarah lying to him, and he had Abraham brought to him and yelled at him and asked, "Why did you do it?" Abraham made a bunch of excuses. Will Abimelech accept his explanation? Does Abimelech have a choice? God told Abimelech in a dream that he not only had to give Sarah back, but he also had to get Abraham to pray for himself and his people because they were sick after taking Sarah. Remember that Abimelech didn't give Abraham anything in return for Sarah when he took her. He just took her. In those days, when a man wanted a wife, he had to negotiate with the family. And negotiate means that he had to make a deal with them to pay for her and agree to whatever her family wanted. People didn't meet and fall in love and all that. The man didn't propose to the woman. He went to, her family and got permission, and he traded animals and money for her. Sometimes she had a choice to say yes or no, and sometimes she didn't. We'll see that happen with Rebecca, who had a choice, and Leah and Rachel, who didn't. Those rules were the same no matter where someone lived in the ancient Near Eastern world, from Egypt to Israel to Babylon. Does that surprise you? That ancient Israel did a lot of things exactly the same way as the pagan nations around them did? There are no people on earth who are totally unique and different from everyone else. We do things the way our ancestors did, just because that's normal for us, and the way our neighbors do things for the same reason. I mean, why do you celebrate birthdays or Mother's Day or whatever else? Generally, we don't even think about why. It's just normal in our culture. If we live somewhere else, then other things would be normal. Not everything the pagan nations did, that's people who didn't worship our God, was wrong. Most of it just boiled down to what was normal for them, like paying a woman's father so you can have her as your wife. It's strange to us now, but they would have seen our way of doing things as weird and even stupid. The Bible doesn't tell us that one way is right and the other way is wrong. It just tells us the story of what did happen when that was part of their normal. When Jesus lived, things were a bit different in some ways and really different in a lot of other ways than they were in the time of Abraham. The Bible describes what happened and not always what should have happened. We've seen a lot of things that were normal up to this point, but shouldn't have been. Definitely shouldn't have been. God wasn't changing things because, he liked what they were doing, right? Some things aren't good or bad, they're just kind of neutral, which means they just are, okay? Let's look at a good example of what shouldn't have happened and what shouldn't even have been legal as we finish up with Genesis 20. Remember, Sarah was kidnapped by Abimelech after Sarah and Abraham had lied about who she was and said that she wasn't married. And now, because they did they all did what was wrong, there's a great big mess. Now let's read Genesis 20, the rest of the chapter. After Abraham told him why they had lied, Abimelech took flocks of sheep and goats and herds of cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham and returned his wife Sarah to him. Abimelech said, "Look, my land is all around you. Settle down and live wherever you want." And then Abimelech said to Sarah, "Look, I'm giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. This will prove to absolutely everyone that nothing happened to you while you were living with me. This is proof that you are innocent. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves so they could have babies again, because God wouldn't let anyone have any babies for as long as they were keeping Sarah. Since Abimelech committed the unforgivable crime of kidnapping someone else's wife, even though he thought she was single, he had to make restitution to Abraham, and that's a very important word in the Bible. Restitution is what God commands us to do when we hurt people in certain ways. We have to not just say we're sorry, but make it up to them somehow. Okay, so restitution isn't just saying sorry. Restitution means making things right again, or as right as possible. Someone who stole a sheep had to pay back 4 sheep. I mean, dang, that's a lot of sheep. And you sure wouldn't want to steal one if you had to give that many back. What would happen if Abimelech had to give Abraham 4 more wives? Remember that in the ancient world, and we've talked about this so many times, stealing from someone was like an attack. You weren't just taking stuff. You were taking stuff from somebody, and to make it right, you not only had to give that thing back, but to give them even more. If you stole someone's sheep, you were making them look bad because they weren't watching their flocks carefully enough, or maybe they hurt you or your shepherds to get the sheep and embarrassed you, shamed you. If you trick someone out of money or whatever, then you're making them look foolish and embarrassing them and making them angry. Giving them the stuff back and having to give them a lot more gives them their pride back and their reputation. No one wanted to be taken advantage of and walked all over. And so people who stole things didn't just go to jail. I mean, there really weren't jails the way we think of them now. You had to make things right, or you got sold into slavery to the person you stole from for 6 whole years. Yikes. When Joseph, and that was just with the children of Israel. Other countries, I mean, maybe you'd probably be sold forever. I actually don't know. I haven't read that in the ancient Near Eastern law codes. I don't know. Maybe I have to. So when Joseph was in jail, he really was in an Egyptian jail where prisoners were kept, because they had jails, I guess. When Paul was in jail 2,000 years later, he was sometimes in an actual jail, but usually he was in a house that he had to rent under house arrest, where he couldn't leave until somebody made a decision about what the heck to do with him. Jesus wasn't in a jail either, because the Jews didn't have jails. If a person sinned badly enough, they heard his case and made a decision. That was that. Of course, the really disturbing thing about this whole situation is that Abimelech saw absolutely nothing wrong with kidnapping a woman just as long as she's not married, and that's super messed up. Abimelech needs Jesus for sure. But Abimelech knows what has to be done in a situation like this. He isn't going to give Abraham 4 more wives, but he does have to pay Abraham back for Sarah. Way more than he would have if he tried to marry her the way things should have been done in those days. Instead of a certain number of sheep or a cow or a slave, Abimelech gave Abraham whole flocks and herds, and that's a lot of critters. And not only that, and that's a lot, but Abimelech did something very surprising. Abimelech actually told Abraham that he could settle down and live wherever he wanted in their land. That means that Abraham will belong there and won't just be passing through, or I guess we could say trespassing through. Abraham will have a home there with the Philistines, even though he isn't becoming a Philistine. This gives Abraham another home base, like the one he has with his friend Mamre to the north in Hebron. This is going to become very important to remember, that Abraham has 2 homes now, even though he lives in tents and not in a house like Lot, who now lives in a cave, actually. One in Hebron and another in Beersheba. I will put a map in the transcript so you can see where those places are. You know, that makes the Bible easier to understand and more interesting when you know where everything is. Abimelech knows that he has to make Abraham happy, and I mean really happy. Really, he's giving Abraham everything he possibly can. He's giving Abraham everything that's worth anything in his world. If Abraham doesn't pray for him, then they're all in big trouble. As Philistines, they are far from their homeland on the island of Crete. And if they can't have children, they're going to get old and die out, or someday maybe another people group will just take in and kill them all and take their stuff. People weren't very nice before Jesus, let me tell you. And the only way to protect yourself was to be bigger and stronger, and for that they needed to have kids. And a lot of them. They had lots of gods, but none of their gods, were like ours. Who would protect them and provide for them without their needing to go around killing and stealing and making slaves out of the people they took over. They were still back in the be fruitful and multiply stage of creation, something we never hear outside the book of Genesis. Now, Jesus tells us to go out and be fruitful and multiply by telling the world about him. He doesn't use those words, though. But they didn't know about him, and so they got bigger by having more babies. I like the way things are now a lot better. The world is full of people, and those people need to know about Jesus. Not only does Abimelech give Abraham all the critters and slaves, but he specifically gives 1,000 pieces of silver to Abraham. Do you know how much money that is? That's over $10,000 today, but back then it was way more because they didn't have nearly as much silver. And now Abimelech is going to talk to Sarah for the first time as he gives Abraham the silver. But what is the silver for? Well, in Hebrew, it sounds different than it does in English. Abimelech says, "This is a covering of eyes for you." What? What does that even mean? Okay, so imagine a situation where you get accused of something you didn't do in front of a lot of people. Maybe you got accused of stealing in the store, okay? And the store security guard took you away, and you were totally embarrassed, but when they looked in your backpack, they didn't find anything because you are actually innocent. Let's say that no one who saw you get arrested left the store until they figured it out, and they announced over the loudspeaker, "Okay, the young person you saw get arrested didn't steal anything, so pretend like you never saw them get arrested. They didn't do anything wrong." Well, that's what covering of eyes meant. It was like telling everyone that they didn't see what they thought they saw. It means that Sarah wasn't ever made Abimelech's wife, and so she can be returned to her husband Abraham without any drama. She's still his wife. He didn't send her away or divorce her or anything like that. Sarah is exactly who she was before she was ever kidnapped, okay? But that isn't all Abimelech says. He says, "I'm giving this to your brother." Now, isn't that a strange thing to say? Because he knows he's her husband. And we don't know exactly what he meant by saying that. Maybe he means it seriously because he believes they're brother and sister, so it might have sounded like, "I'm giving this to your brother who is also your husband. I see now that I assumed you were his sister when I took you, so, my bad." Or maybe he isn't believing the story about them being brother and sister, and he's irritated at Sarah for having lied to him, which would have sounded like, "I'm giving this to your brother," which is a nice scam and worked out really great for you two, right? Or maybe he's giving Abraham the side eye since he knows that Abraham told her to say that. "I'm giving this to your brother so that everyone knows you are innocent." The Bible doesn't have a lot of explanation as to what people are thinking, and so maybe this was serious and maybe it was snarky, but we do know he was really angry. If it was me, it'd be snarky. But then I'm just really feeling snarky today. Means I'm feeling like a smart aleck. Okay, my guess is that Abimelech doesn't believe they are brother and sister, and neither do I. But like I said last time, we just don't know for sure. I'm quite certain that if God hadn't told Abimelech that he needed to get Abraham to pray for him, then Abimelech would have just killed them both and taken all their stuff. Abimelech got scammed, and it cost him a lot. But then there is no excuse for kidnapping someone who is probably older than your grandma. He was a bad dude, and bad things happened to him, but that doesn't mean that Abraham and Sarah were right to lie to him. They just still don't trust God enough yet to protect them so Isaac can be born. Abraham takes the loot and prays to God for Abimelech so that God will heal Abimelech and his entire family so that they can all start having babies again. We don't know exactly what was wrong with everyone, but whatever it was must have been pretty bad if absolutely no one could have any babies. Abraham didn't heal them. I hope you saw that. God healed them. We never see Abraham working miracles. Abraham is called a prophet because he speaks to God and God hears him. So far, we've seen Abraham talk to God about Ishmael, the son he loves, and the people of Sodom. You know, Abraham wanted God to give them special favor and to choose Ishmael to be his heir and inherit all his stuff, and to be merciful with the people of Sodom if there are even just 10 good people there. And that's really a big privilege, to speak and to have God listening. Sometimes we just don't want to pray, but not everyone has God paying attention to them. When we accept Jesus as our King and we give our loyalty and lives to him and his kingdom, Jesus says that God hears our prayers. You know, God hears our prayers when we tell God that he's the boss of us. You know, not because we're prophets, but because we're his children. He listens to us just like he listened to Abraham. And Abraham understood that being able to talk to God meant that he could make a difference in what God was going to do and whom God might help. And that goes for us too. When we talk to God about things, he hears what we want. Even if no one else is praying about that thing, we are, and that's amazing. God doesn't always do what we want because he isn't like a vending machine where we put a few coins in and get whatever we want, or a magic genie where we can rub his lamp or whatever and get wishes. But he does care what we think and cares about what we want and need. Abimelech was a king, and Abraham didn't even have a permanent home, but when Abraham talked, God was listening. God didn't always like what Abraham had to say, and God told him no quite a bit, or to wait, or whatever, but God was paying attention. Abimelech could talk all day, and God was probably just ignoring him until the day he kidnapped Sarah. It didn't matter that Abimelech was a king because someone who has a relationship with God has more than a king will ever have. Abimelech felt like he was innocent and done nothing wrong, whereas Abraham had lied. Abimelech had lost a lot of critters and money and slaves, and Abraham got all the critters and money and slaves. Abimelech lost Sarah, and Abraham got her back. In a lot of ways, it seems wrong, right? Wrong, right? Abraham got rewarded for doing the wrong thing. Kinda. But in the next chapter, we'll see that Abraham's bad reputation is going to cause some problems with Abimelech and later with Sarah and Isaac too. No one ever totally gets away with everything. Abraham is God's choice. Not because he's perfect or his family is perfect, because his family is going to be really messed up through quite a few generations. Good things happen to Abraham because God has things he needs to do through Abraham's family. Because God promised. Not because Abraham deserves all the critters and stuff. If Abraham had just trusted God, then twice Sarah wouldn't have been taken, and 2 kings wouldn't have been angry with him, and 2 nations wouldn't have had to deal with plagues and sickness. I've seen in my life and in the Bible that there are two sorts of people who are called by God to work in his kingdom. There are the ones who understand how easy it is to hurt others, and those who are more afraid of being hurt. Abraham can bless more people because God is listening, but he can also hurt more people because God has promised to make him into a mighty nation. And sometimes Abraham uses that to help people, which is great. But other times people get hurt when Abraham isn't thinking about the consequences of lying or being impatient or being selfish. But I give Abraham a lot of credit for getting a lot of things right, even though he got some major things wrong. Abraham didn't have a Bible that he could read to teach him about God and his kingdom. Jesus hadn't come either, and Abraham wasn't ever given the Holy Spirit to help him out. You know, we're really blessed to live in a time after Jesus. It makes it a lot easier for us to learn what does and doesn't please God. That's why Jesus said something very surprising about John the Baptist. Now, if you don't know who that is, you aren't alone. John was actually Jesus' cousin, and he was a lot like Isaac because his parents were very old. The Bible tells us that his parents were blameless, keeping all of God's commandments, but they still didn't have any kids. And that was a tough way to live because people assumed that, the only reason you wouldn't have kids is if there was something wrong with what you're doing. Today we understand that things are way more complicated. Yay for science. Jesus even had to tell his own disciples that just because someone was blind doesn't mean they'd done anything to deserve it. Wouldn't that be awful? As if it isn't bad enough for your eyes or legs or ears or whatever not to work, but people are thinking it's your fault. Anyway, God remembered Elizabeth and Zechariah when they were very old, and she had a baby, and God named him John. The Bible talked about John a long time before he was born, long time before his parents were even born. You see, the Bible would say that the greatest prophet and miracle worker in the Hebrew Bible, Elijah, would return. Okay? You see, we aren't really sure if Elijah died or not because God took him away in a golden chariot while his disciple Elisha watched. It's a big mystery. Like when Enoch was taken away, and where on earth did God bury Moses anyway? The Bible is full of things we don't know and can't understand, and that's okay. That's why there's so many what-if stories written about the Bible by Christians, Jews, and Muslims too. We like to try and fill in the blanks. But there is one blank we don't have to fill in. Jesus told us that when John was born, that was when Elijah returned and that his job was to prepare the way for Jesus. Preparing the way for someone means to get everything ready, and especially to get people excited and ready for their Messiah to come and save them. That doesn't mean that John knew everything, and in fact, even though he knew Jesus was the Messiah, he was really confused by a lot of what Jesus was saying. The great thing about John is that even though he didn't understand everything, he still did what God had created him to do, and that's pretty special. Even when he was in jail. But John died before Jesus died and rose from the dead. John died because he was telling two very wicked people that they were, well, very wicked people. John had the Holy Spirit like Elijah, and although he never worked any miracles, Jesus called John the greatest man ever born up to that point. He was the greatest because it was his job to do the most important thing that had ever been done up to that point, showing everyone that the Messiah, the King of Israel, was coming and baptizing him so that we could follow him by being baptized too. He didn't need to be baptized because he had never done anything wrong, but he was here to show us the way into the kingdom of God where he is king and we are totally loyal to him, hopefully. John wasn't baptized that way. He never got to have Jesus as his king. He didn't get to see him resurrected and alive again. John didn't get to see what happened at the first Pentecost after Jesus was alive again and when the Holy Spirit came down on everyone and everything started to become new again and people started changing, into kingdom people. That's the reason why Jesus said that everyone who gets to be part of his kingdom is even greater than John the Baptist. Not that we're better or anything, but because we get to live in a world made better by Jesus. And we know things that John never knew because we live after the greatest thing that ever happened. We are so blessed to be alive after Jesus, and it doesn't mean that life is easy all the time, but it is easier because of him. Even when everything around us is crazy. Imagine if Abraham had lived after Jesus, his story would probably be much different. I love you. I'm praying for you. I know that life can be awful, scary, and crazy sometimes. That's the way things are right now, and they always have been. But we can always know that without Jesus with us and his Holy Spirit helping us, it would be a lot worse. Knowing that we have him and that he is trustworthy even when we aren't, and good when we're bad, and all that, it means that we don't have to worry about him and what he will do and won't do. He's always the same, even when we are bouncing off the walls and acting like total goober heads.